Welcome to this video on the 10 things I know to be true about thesis writing. In this video, what I'd like to share with you are the 10 things that I think are really important. And this comes from 20 years of experience working with doctoral and master's students and trying to help them successfully complete their dissertations and theses. Some of the things that I'll talk about are not directly related to writing, but really help if you understand them. So that's what I've provided for you here, and I've also through the images provided you with some pet therapy in case you need it. Number one of the 10 things I know to be true is conceptualization is absolutely key. This is where it all begins. If you take a course with me, or if I supervise your research, if you come to me for help, this is where I'm going to send you. What do I mean by conceptualization? I mean aligning all the elements of the research project. So the problem, the literature, the purpose, the conceptual framework, the methodology, and the analysis. All of these are lined up so that there's some kind of logic to them. I have several videos out there on the problem, purpose statement, and question, which is a technique to help you conceptualize your research. So I would suggest you go and look up those videos and start with this. And what I would suggest is that you do a draft of your conceptualization, you take it to your supervisor, you discuss it, you change it, you adapt it, and you work on it until you're happy with it before you move on to other aspects of the research. When people get stuck and they think it's a writing problem, it's often a conceptualization problem. They can't move forward because there isn't this alignment in the project. So spending a bit more time at the beginning, looking at your conceptualization, will save you a lot of time at the end or even at any point in the thesis. So this to me is absolutely crucial. If you only take one thing away from this presentation, take this. Number two is that academic knowledge is contested. When we often think that research produces truths, and this is true to an extent. Research does produce truths, but what we really are doing is presenting arguments, and that argument is supported by evidence. Now, if that evidence convinces the audience, then the audience will decide whether that is truth-like. If the evidence doesn't convince the audience, then the audience will not believe in that truth. So this is really important to understand because it underlies all your reading and it underlies all your writing. So when you're reading, you're not reading for facts. You're reading for arguments, and you're evaluating the evidence because you are the audience in that instance. And when you write, you are writing arguments. Now, in some disciplines, the arguments are much more embedded in the sciences, for example, and your writing will look much more truth-like, but there is still an argument in there. In the social sciences, the arguments are much more upfront and obvious. But whatever you're writing within an academic context, you are trying to convince and persuade someone else. And this makes a big difference in terms of understanding the purpose of academic writing as well as how to write it. I have a video on writing arguments, so go and have a look at that if this is something you want to pursue further. Number three, we always write in a context. And what that means is that writing is very specific. It's specific to the context that you're in. We tend to think that writing is universal, that if we learned writing at school, we should be able to write in a biology lab. If we learned English writing, then we should be able to write an academic paper. But those are very different kinds of writing, and there are very different audiences. So writing is specific to the context that you're in, and you need to look at what the requirements are within that context. The most important part of this context is the audience. That's your disciplinary community or your discourse community. Now, that audience will have certain expectations of your writing. So if you write a literature review, for example, there's an implicit contract between the writer and the reader. The reader expects, especially within that disciplinary context, to have certain things in that literature review. Now, if you're writing a literature review in science versus a literature review in English, they would be completely different. That's why the context is so important. And the contracts would be different. The reader expectations would be different. So what this all speaks to is the purpose for writing. So every time we write, we need to have a purpose and we need to be clear about that purpose. And I would even put in the sentence, the purpose of this chapter, this section, whatever it is to, especially in the early drafts. Later on you can cut those out, if it's too repetitive, but it just helps you to focus. The purpose of this chapter is to do what? And then you're setting up that contract between you and the reader, because you're saying to the reader, this is what I'm going to provide you. So think about your context, particularly the disciplinary requirements, and think about that contract and what your reader's expectations are. Number 4, writing is thinking and discovery. Now, many people, when they come to graduate school, think that writing is something you do at the end of research, that you do all the other things and then you sit down and write it up. And then they're surprised why at the end they get stuck. Because writing is actually much more than that. We construct our research findings and discoveries through writing. We work out what we think, what we know, what we don't know, what we still have to find out through writing. So what I would suggest is that you begin writing right from the beginning of your project. When you're conceptualizing, write memos to yourself. Set up a journal on your desktop or get a physical tactile notebook, a researcher's notebook, and write in it every day, even if it's just jotting down things. So in a memo to yourself, you might write, what is my problem in this research? How am I going to differentiate it from other problems? Which problem is more important? Which problem will come into the foreground? Which will move into the background? So just little notes to yourself where you're thinking through things. The more you do this, the more you will work things out so that when it comes to writing, it's much easier to construct that final kind of draft. And all these bits and pieces that you write to yourself, your thoughts down on paper, they all help to consolidate that first draft, to come together in that first draft. And what I would suggest is that when you sit down to write, spend 5-10 minutes writing in your journal first as a warm-up activity, talking about what you think you'll put into this section that you're going to write, how you want it to look, and then you'll find it's much easier to ease into writing the actual section. Related to number 4 is number 5. Writing is a process. It's not just the end product. So many times I see students wanting to get the chapter or the section or whatever it is perfect the first time they write it. So they sit down to write and they expect it to all come out perfectly. It very rarely works that way. I mean, there might be some people who can do that. I have never come across anyone who can do that. I certainly can't do that myself. Instead, what I'm trying to say is that you have to have something to say when you write. That's what makes writing fluency. And that's what stops you from getting stuck, is when you sit down to write, you feel like you have something to say and you know how to say it. And the way to do that is to take the approach that writing is a process. So what this means is that you have pre-writing activities, and this would be reading, note-taking, memos to yourself about the reading, linking it to your research. You might do outlining or plans. So all those little notes and bits and pieces. You might do sketches of perhaps your literature review. You might map out, everyone who's relevant in your field. So those maps, sketches, little free writes and notes to yourself all make up the pre-writing. Then when you sit down to write the draft, you take all of those bits and pieces, the outline that you've prepared, your notes from readings, and you write a draft. And when you write the draft will be terrible. You'll have gaps. It won't all be in the right place. But the thing you're focusing on is getting the whole story down. That's the message. That's what you want to focus on, is what am I trying to say in this piece? Once you've got the draft, then you start revising. The first revision is the big block kind of revision. Have I got all the foundational pieces in place? And that would be your looking back at your conceptualization. The second round would be moving chunks of writing around to reorganize it, adding in bits where you left gaps, where you said fill this in later. The big kind of moving things around. And then you get down to crafting the beginnings and endings, looking at whether or not your argument is carefully crafted, how the sections work together. And then finally you get to language, fixing up language, and then the last kind of revision would be proofreading, and that's the kind of finicky details at the end. It's much easier to work with something once you have a draft, no matter how terrible it is. The first draft is the hardest thing to get down. So if you take this approach, you'll find that you will develop writing fluency. It's much easier to write if you have something to say. Number 6, writing begets writing. Now, what this means is that, writing generates writing. It's like any activity that you do in your life. If you do it often, it becomes easier to do it. So what I would suggest is that you keep your researcher's journal, whether it's on your computer or as a notebook, and you write in that every day. So even if you can't focus on your writing that day, you are still writing in this journal. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be well-generated sentences. It can be notes to yourself. If you write a blog, if you write poetry, if you write letters, long emails to other people, it doesn't matter. You are still exercising those muscles. So the more you write, the more writing you will produce, even if it is not academic writing. And this is something I have proved in my writing groups that I've had with people who really struggle to write. I get them to write things that are relatively easy, and they write lots of that, and then the transition into academic writing is much easier. So it's not important what you write, it's important that you write every single day. So if you are really stuck or struggling, then before, or when you get up, write in your journal, I'm stuck and I'm struggling. And just allow yourself to write about that and keep going with that until you feel like you can move on to, doing something else. You'll see that even that kind of writing will help you, because every time you write, you're building your writing muscles. You're developing your endurance for writing 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. The other thing I always suggest, particularly if you struggle to sit down and write, is to do a warm-up exercise. And it doesn't have to be related to your research. Now, if you're worried about time and you feel like you can't waste time doing other things, then do a warm-up activity related to your research. Just a question like, what am I thinking about my research now? What do I have left to do? What, what surprises am I finding as I do this research? So ask yourself questions about your research and just do a quick write. Don't worry about language, grammar, or constructing it perfectly. So these warm-up exercises are really just to get you in the mood to make the transition from the craziness out there to this calm space where you're now going to write. It works like warm-up exercises if you're doing, if you're running or if you're doing any other kind of exercise. It just gets you in the mood and it helps you to transition. So the more you write, the more writing you will produce. I know it sounds crazy. Okay, number 7. Turning up to write equals finishing. So the number one thing you have to do is schedule writing time. So if you don't schedule writing time, it's unlikely that you will get your writing done. Now, I'm not saying you have to schedule regular time. For many years, I struggled with writing because people always told me you have to write every day or you have to write at the same time, every week. And I couldn't do that. I had a really busy life, young kids, lots of things going on, and I couldn't guarantee that I could write at the same time every day. So what I said to myself is that I need to write 3 hours this week, let's say. And that was my schedule. So every day I would try and fit that 1 hour in until I'd accomplished that for the week. So you can be flexible around how you schedule the writing time. And it's really dependent on you and your personality and how much you can do. Some people can write in 15 minutes. I can't do that. Other people, I need time to sit down, think about this, warm up, and then start. Other people need, the whole morning to do that, and I couldn't find that amount of time. So you need to work it around your life and your schedule. But scheduling writing time is absolutely crucial because you only know you're avoiding if you don't turn up for that writing time. So once you've scheduled writing time, you need to show up and write. And in the beginning, it doesn't matter what you write, just that you show up and you write. So in your scheduled writing time, if you feel you're really resisting, you don't want to be here, you don't want to do this, then write about that. Write about anything. Write about what you'd rather be doing. But stay there for that time that you have scheduled to write. And you'll find that after a while you will move into the research writing. So persevere, don't give up. It's really easy to get distracted these days. We have so many things to distract us. Turn off all those distractions during your writing time. Don't let them interfere and just persevere for that time that you've scheduled. And then the last point I want to make is that you need to romance your thesis. You can't write what is essentially a huge document if you hate it. It's going to be very, very difficult to write, and it's not going to be an enjoyable process. Now, the way the research love story works is like this: is you decide on a topic, or you get given a topic, and you absolutely love it. You think it's wonderful, it's exciting. You love everything about it, all its funny quirks. And then after a couple of months, it starts misbehaving and it doesn't do what you want it to do. It's not going the way you thought it would go. And then you start to get irritated by those funny quirks and all the things you loved before. And eventually it goes into the bottom drawer because there are other more exciting projects to work on, and that poor project gets neglected. So what I'm suggesting is you take it out of the bottom drawer and you begin to woo it, romance your thesis, take it out for a date, get to know it again, learn about what interested you in this in the first place. Start to see the delightful things about your research. And that will help you to keep it close because you want it to be close then, and to move forward with it. Okay, romance your thesis. Number 8, small bites work. So if you are finding it really difficult to start writing or to begin, my suggestion would be to break writing up into the smallest task you can handle. So what I mean there is when you think about sitting down to write and you immediately feel that resistance, then reduce what you've set yourself to do until you feel like you can get it done in your scheduled writing time. So I would suggest you work in paragraphs. And if one paragraph is all that you can do, then that's what you need to do. Start with one paragraph, add another paragraph, add another paragraph. I have a video on paragraphs, and it has a structure which will help you to finish that paragraph. And you'll find that once you can do that, and once you see some progress, it will be easier to keep going and you'll write for longer and longer periods. The most important thing is to start. Don't worry about finishing. You want to start that paragraph and stay there during your writing time. And start with the easiest thing. Whatever you think you can do, start with that. You don't have to start with the introduction. I actually think introductions are the hardest things of all, and I always write them last. So I would say start with, a description of a paper, a study, your methodology. That's often the easiest to begin with, and then work paragraph by paragraph. Number 9 is we never write alone. I see so many students who feel that if they ask for help, it's somehow a sign of failure. But if you look at writing in academic contexts, particularly academic publishing, you'll see that nobody writes alone. If you write a paper for publication, often it's in collaboration with others, but we also send that off for review. We get lots of feedback. We change that, whatever we've written in response to the feedback, and then we send it off again. So we always need feedback of some sort. Now, in this journey that you're on, you will find some people will help you with your writing, some people will hinder you, and some people are shapeshifters in the sense that they help you at the beginning and they hinder you at the end, or they hinder you at the beginning and they help you at the end. But it's really important to try and find people who can be part of your journey. So find a writing buddy. You don't have to be working in the same field. You just have to work in parallel, or find a writing group that you can go to, or find people within your discipline or faculty, students who've been there longer, perhaps other faculty who you can ask advice for and get some feedback. It's really useful to have all these other people providing you with help and feedback along the way. If we try and do it on our own, that's often where we get stuck and then stay stuck for a long time without moving forward, when somebody could just give you a little bit of advice and that could push you through whatever it is that you're facing. So try and keep that in mind. Getting help from people is not a sign of failure. It's actually a sign that you are participating as everyone else would in this field. Number 10, good writing is more than good grammar. And this is something, again, that I've shown over and over in my courses and in the writing groups that I've run. So I'm not saying that grammar is not important. You do need to have good grammar, but that's not the place to start. The place to start is with conceptualization, understanding arguments and being able to develop a really good argument, understanding the nature of knowledge in your discipline, what is valued, what counts as evidence, how writing works in your discipline, understanding the contracts between readers and writers. For example, in literature reviews, that's what I mean by genre, is that format, the format of a published paper. If you understand all those things, particularly conceptualization, which are the foundations, then you'll find that you can fix the grammar at the end. The grammar will sort itself out. You can get that edited, you can get someone to help you. You can do it yourself because the building blocks are in place. But if you don't have those building blocks in place, you can edit and edit and edit your grammar, and it won't improve your writing. Now, I know I said I had 10 things to tell you, but I've added a bonus one. And this, again, is one of these really important things. Number 11, our internal critical voice helps or hinders our progress. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about this, and I have at least 5 videos. I think this is so important to understand, that internal voice that we have in our heads that kind of sits on our shoulders, and as we write, it criticizes what we write. It's so important to understand what that voice is saying and to notice how that voice is helping or hindering us, particularly at the beginning of a project when we might feel insecure and vulnerable about what we're thinking or writing. We might not be sure about what we're doing. That critical voice can get in the way. So when you sit down to write, you want to be sure to keep that critical voice quiet, and you can bring it in later on once you've got a draft. But when you are generating writing, it's so important to keep that voice quiet. And I have lots of advice and strategies in my videos that look at this specifically. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. And please search my name on YouTube and have a look at all the videos that I have there on research writing. There are now 40, maybe even 50 videos. So there's plenty of material out there. And I wish you all the best with your writing. And I hope it goes really well for you.